Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
We've got a great show for you today. You know, Heidi, it's so much wonderful to have a grief expert on like David Kessler, isn't it?
Absolutely, Mom. We've known David for a long time, and he is the leading expert in the world on grief and loss, so it's very exciting to have him here. David has written 5 best-selling books.
Whoa.
Yes, and we're going to talk about one of them today.
And with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, many of you have heard of her and her fame, and Louise Hay, and who else?
He's written 2 books with Louise Hay. I mean, 1 book with Louise Hay and 2 with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Great. And you know, I want to say, we're saying, you know, all this upbeat and all that, but I want you to know that David doesn't just talk the talk. He's walked the walk. He had a mom who died when he was a younger guy. His dad has passed away, and he's also recently had a wonderful son die. And so he's not only going to be here for you as an expert, because we know you need that expert advice, but also with real heart. So thank you, David. It's so fabulous to have you on the show today.
I'm so honored to
Hi,
be
David.
with you both.
Great to have you on today.
Great to be here.
Really is. Now, here you've been this grief expert forever, and you've now written a new book. And I know that there's some issues, we don't want to go into it too much, about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Some of our people know about her. She was one of the first people who ever went into a hospital and really found that people were dying. And she wrote a book on death and dying and was just so well known, such a wonderful person. And David, you worked with her and wrote a book with her. And talk just quickly about the stages and why you've written this new book and about your new book.
Well, many people know, as you mentioned, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote On Death and Dying in 1969. And the stages were getting misused for grief. And so Elizabeth...
And let's tell people what those stages are.
They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
You know, when I was at the University of Rochester in the medical center there, I worked on the surgical service with people who had family members who were dying or had died, and we loved those stages. She was the first person who gave us kind of a handle that we could come on and look at. So we taught them pretty rigorously, but now
they were such a... Before that, death was a mystery. No one talked about it. So Elizabeth wanted to adapt the stages for grief formally, so we wrote the book on grief and grieving together where we adapted them. And Elizabeth was a very organic, messy, rule-breaking woman. And the idea that they've become these neat stages that you're supposed to follow,
step by step.
Oh, she would be appalled by that.
So they're not supposed to be linear.
They know we go through them a million times a day. Not everyone goes to anger.
Not everyone accepts it. Do you know?
Absolutely. So I tell people one of the big misunderstandings is that we don't follow the stages. The stages reflect where we are.
Oh, I like this.
And they help normalize our grief, but they are not a map for grief.
I think that's important, David, because what I hear people saying is, okay, I'm in anger, let's say, or one stage, and then all of a sudden I'm back in an earlier stage. Am I going backwards? What's wrong with me?
And we
and
shift
it can even
through
be years later. You can have a reaction to, say, somebody getting married or a wedding or somebody else dying, and suddenly you're back at anger, or, I mean, I was supposed to be through with that.
Well, and the disbelief and shock, you kind of go back and forth between that. And sometimes I would think, after Scott died for years, I would think I'd saw him in a crowd, which was completely irrational. I would run up to some blonde, curly-haired boy and look, and it wasn't him. So, you know, it takes us a long time to wrap our arms around the permanence.
And you never know that you got those pictures in your brain. Well, talk to us why you put in another stage, and tell us about your book.
So the new stage, here's why it came about, is because people also misunderstood the stages as acceptance being a finality, that the grief would end. And as we all know, the grief doesn't end. People say to me, how long will I grieve? And I go, well, how long is a person going to be dead? Because if they're going to be dead a long time, you're going to grieve a long time. We don't always grieve with pain. We can grieve with love. So I thought, after my own losses, and especially the recent one, I thought...
And that is of your son, David,
my son,
right?
David.
And how old?
He was 21. I just couldn't stop at acceptance. I wanted to find more, the idea of finding meaning. And it's interesting, I had been researching a few years prior meaning and Viktor Frankl's work, and I thought, I wonder, could meaning be another stage? And I wrote a number of chapters.
Now, I know you talk a little bit about Viktor Frankl in your book, just so people know who haven't read Man's Search for Meaning. He developed something called logotherapy, and basically what I always gotten out of Viktor Frankl, if there's a why, you'll find a how.
Correct.
You know, so why, find a reason to live, and you'll find a how to do it. He was in Nazi concentration camps. So,
correct.
So, yeah.
Correct.
Carry on.
So
with
I
that
had
thought.
written these chapters, and after my own son died, I remember going back to the book and going, and looking at it going, yeah, like this is going to help. And when I went back and read some of it, it didn't take the pain away, but it gave me a little bit of a cushion and framework. So that's why I wanted to do the book, Finding Meaning.
I wanted to say that Heidi and I have been involved with some trauma things recently, and there are two things you need, Heidi: peer support, and what was the other?
Peer support and coping skills.
Coping skills. I mean, that's one thing. One thing I must say drives me a little crazy, and when Scott died, I was a therapist, and I went to a therapist, and they weren't giving me coping skills.
Right.
I mean, I don't need somebody to sit there and not talk to me, or say, how are you feeling, and how's it going? That's fine, that goes so far, but I wanted some coping skills, David, and that's what you do.
Well, that's what I wanted to give people, steps and techniques and things like that.
I love that.
You'll appreciate this. God bless the editors I work with, they're amazing.
Right.
But there were times in each chapter when I was talking about child loss or death by suicide or addiction or a spouse dying, I would talk about the self-blame and the regrets and the what-ifs and the if-onlys. And the editors were going, you're being repetitive. Just say one time in the book, not to blame yourselves. And I went, if only it was that easy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm repetitive on purpose.
Yeah, you could
I'm
have a big
repetitive
sign
on
that
purpose.
said forgiveness of self is like,
Right.
really, yeah.
Well, and we do the should've, would've, could've because we want to see if we can control it because we're afraid it might happen again, right?
Right. It's
So
so
we keep going
uncontrollable.
back.
And then we catastrophize because we've had a catastrophe.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also want to say, first of all, I'm so grateful to the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation and family to allow me to add a stage to her iconic stages.
I love it. Now tell us your book, and because at
It's
the end of it
Finding
says
Meaning,
a stage.
the sixth stage
I
of
love
meaning,
it.
a sixth stage of grief.
Okay.
So the sixth stage is meaning, right? So I'm so proud of that book.
Right.
And I also just want to say, just the idea of you two with Open to Hope. Meaning is not a new thing I've come up with. I mean, literally, your work is about hope and meaning.
Well,
so
that's what I was gonna ask you.
I'm like,
When you
I just
say
want to
meaning-
acknowledge.
Thank you.
When you say meaning, and thank you, David, I love that you're acknowledging us. Sometimes when people hear the word meaning, they think, how would I make meaning out of the death of a child or sibling?
Right.
I don't understand
Right.
what this means.
So we're not talking about making meaning like a child or anyone being murdered. There's no meaning in the death.
Okay.
But there's meaning in what happens afterwards. And there's meaning in their life.
Okay.
So what did that person mean to you? How do they live in you? How are you the best piece of evidence that they lived?
Oh, I love that. How are you the best piece of evidence that they lived?
You know, so many times when we deal with the possessions, we don't want to let go of their belongings.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, you're the most amazing belonging. You two are evidence that Scott lived.
Right. That's a
You're the
beautiful
living,
thing.
breathing evidence. You're the memory holder. That's meaning. And to
Right.
teach people
That's powerful.
It is.
this moment's meaningful.
Right.
I'll say that sometimes with people as I'm talking. There's no meaning. And I'll say, I'm finding meaning in just hearing about your loved one.
Wow. That's a great way to think about
That
it. too.
is a wonderful way to think about meaning. So finding meaning is really finding it within yourself. Again, Frankl said if you can find a why,
Right.
you'll find a how. So why? What's the meaning for me? What am I going to do? Heidi sometimes says, I love it, I'm living my life for my brother.
And for me. And you know, we've got a new connection that's very strong. He's my guiding light. It's really hard, I think, early on though, and it was very hard for
Right.
me, to figure out who am I without Scott in my life?
Right.
And why am I still here? And what is the meaning of my life now?
And that's so important because, you know, people ask me all the time, is there life after death for our loved ones? And I say, well, I believe there is life after death for them. But I think there's life after death for us.
I like that.
Do we
Ooh,
get
I
to
love
live?
it. There's a life after their death, and do we get to
For
live?
us, do we
Yes.
get to do that?
Do we get to
still
live?
get to live? And we have so many beliefs that it's being disloyal to them. You know, people.
Or that we're not showing the world that we miss them?
Correct. And I, you know, just even on my lectures and retreats I do, we've done where there's a photo of me smiling, and people were writing, go, why is he smiling? He's a grief expert. And I'll go, first of all, do you want me to look like I'm about to jump?
Right.
I mean, why, you know? And second, I think about the people in my own life who have died. They would never want to think they took my smile away.
Right.
Well, and I always say the connection with somebody that we loved is when we're in that good space smiling. That's about their life. When we are grieving and in pain, we are more in the way that they died,
Right.
not the way that they lived.
Right. And we have to, you know, and I also want to be so clear, meaning is not taking away the pain. None of us can take away the pain
Right.
of your loved one dying, but we can add meaning to that.
Well, David, we need to know how to get in touch with you, and we've got a picture on. We'll have a picture online of all your books, and
Thank you.
Where's your website? And
Grief.com. So it's easy to
Grief.com.
find, grief.com. And I would love people to check out all the resources there. There's a companion class with the book.
I like
so
that.
lots of things to help people.
Now, David, I'm going to ask, where do you live, and are you in private practice?
I am in Los Angeles. I don't see people, individuals. I teach groups, I run retreats, I
Okay.
teach a lot of therapists and counselors,
So on
and
your
online
website-
classes.
Okay, on your website, I know you teach all over the world, and it's all on your website.
Yes, going to
Okay,
be
that's
going
good
to
to know.
the UK, Australia, all over.
Wow.
And the other thing is I have online classes for people, and I tell people, because they're a supplement to the work that all of us
Love
do, and no one is ever turned away for lack of funds.
Wow, that's great.
You know, because I
David,
think,
beautiful, beautiful.
you know,
Well,
in grief,
David,
we all have to help here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your work, David, and for all you do for your wonderful son, David, and for the world. It's
Thank
really
you.
fabulous.
It's
and
amazing.
I want to say that Meghan Pulles is going to sing for us, Heidi. Meghan's been on our podcast, and she's a wonderful gal, and she is going to sing How for us at the end of the show.
How? I love it.
How. And before we end the show, David, I wondered if you could give a few tips to people who've had a recent loss.
Sure, I think just to know where you are is exactly right. You're not supposed to be going any faster or any slower. You know, we come from a long line of dead people. Somewhere
love
in
that.
our soul, we know how grief is supposed to work.
Yep.
Second thing is don't compare yourself. You know, if you may think I'm going too fast or too slow. And the third thing I would say to people is what others think of your grief is really none of your business.
That's good.
Grieve for yourself.
Grieve for yourself.
I love it.
Powerful.
Grieve for yourself.
Very
Really
powerful.
wonderful. I also wanted to ask you, I know people are going to be curious about your Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I have to say one thing. I know that she did all this work, but she wasn't very happy at the end of her life, right?
You know, that's a bit of a myth, and I'll tell you where the myth comes from. When Elizabeth had her stroke, she had said so many years, she had said, when I die, I want to be taken out quickly. I want to get hit by a Mack truck. And she said the worst thing I could get would be a stroke.
Oh, wow.
And then when she got a stroke in 1995, she was furious.
Wow.
And there were headlines that said Elizabeth Kubler-Ross dying a bitter death. But then she didn't die. She went on to have another 10 years, but people think of those articles as her having a bad death. And we wrote 2 books after that.
Wow.
And she had a very beautiful, sweet death, and I was honored to be there, and I can tell you, it's what she would have wanted.
That's
It was very
amazing.
personal and very sweet.
I'm so glad you've cleared all that up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Her work continues on the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation.
Foundation, right, right.
And we've had Ken Ross on the show.
Ken
He's
Ross is wonderful, absolutely.
So when you do a workshop, do you have any stories or any thoughts about people changing with trauma? One of the things I'm concerned about is we have people come in who've had a trauma and they don't seem to be able to get over it. They're still seeing the pictures, they did CPR, they did that kind of thing. And Heidi and I often have that. People ask us, what do we do about trauma?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because all trauma has grief, but not all grief has trauma.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And so when we have those pictures of that trauma, I normalize that for people. Early on, our mind doesn't know where to put a file for watching my loved one die. We don't have a file for that. So I normalize that it does float for a while. But then we have to figure out a way to integrate it. And I tell people, you have that picture of that one moment. Sometimes I'll have people take their loved one's age and multiply out how many minutes they lived, how many seconds they lived, to help them really understand that was 1 minute when they died.
Yeah.
Thousands or hundreds of thousands of moments. Get pictures of their life and put them around. That's not the only moment. It's one moment. It's a tragic moment. But there's thousands of moments of their life.
I like this because sometimes people get stuck in the trauma narrative and they keep reliving it.
Right.
And like you said, that's not who they were.
Right. And sometimes we ground people, as you know, we'll go feel the seat, feel your feet on the floor. And when we have people name 5 things in the room, I'll also sometimes have them name 5 things that aren't in the room.
Oh.
Like I would look around and I would go, there's not an ironing board in here. There's not roller skates in here. There's not a cake in here. And your loved one's not getting hit by a car in here today. That was one moment that passed. Today, your loved one is safe. And I ground them, and then I'll have them talk about their loved one. I'll go, where's your loved one now? And they'll go, well, they're in the afterlife. They're in heaven. Let's breathe that in. We're safe here in the chair. Our loved one is in heaven. They're not getting hit by a car today.
Right. Do you see a difference between men and women? Are you seeing more women at your groups when you do presentations? Or it seems like men sometimes are not dealing.
They are not. And I did a radio show the other night from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Wow.
And it was all these truckers going across the country talking about grief that we're calling in.
Oh, fascinating.
So I was just, I was thrilled to have reached them. I didn't even know that there are truckers out there driving in the middle of the night in grief.
Wow.
And that they had so much to say. So I hope it's changing, that men are embracing their feelings more. I'll often say to men who will say, crying is a sign of weakness. And I'll go, did you see the firefighters at 9/11 digging through the rubble?
Yep.
I didn't think they were weak. Oh, I hadn't thought of that archetype. Yeah, think of that. That's an image.
Yep.
Strong men grieve. Strong men cry. It's
Do
not a sign
you
of
find
weakness.
men, though, want to be more active than
Absolutely.
women do?
We want to
Is that part
fix
of
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me the 3 things to fix it. I want to fix my wife. I want to fix them. I want to fix my sister. We all do that. We do. But
Yeah.
men especially, we're fixers.
Yeah.
Give
yeah.
us a task.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the other message in grief is we begin to think we're broken. And we're not broken. This is what grief looks like.
And
Right.
sometimes we don't think we're tough enough to get through it,
Yep.
but we are.
We are.
I mean, all the people we've had on the show, the people that write for us, the people that you see, we'll get through it. But it's not an easy,
No.
an easy
People are
trip.
like, how am I going to survive this?
Right. And that doubt, that pain, that I'm falling is what early grief looks like. So many times people want to go, how can I get them through this and all that? And I go, well, this is what it's supposed to look like. It is supposed to feel horrible.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to have someone you love die and be just fine about it.
Right.
Grief is supposed to turn your world upside down.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it definitely turned mine upside down. And it is, I think, a physical, psychological, and emotional assault to your system. There's so much going on. And it's exhausting when you're grieving.
Absolutely. Grief is exhausting. And I can tell you, it's been 3 years, and I was stunned, even as a grief expert, as this being the 3rd anniversary. I could feel it in my body that day. I just, so I'll normalize that for people when they go, how can we make the anniversary okay? That's the 1st anniversary. I'm like, you can't make it okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be hideous.
Right.
Just be with the hideousness of it.
Yeah.
Your loved one died on that day.
Yeah.
You're returning to the scene of the crime.
Yeah, and be prepared. One thing that happens, though, sometimes it's worse before the event, before the day comes. But anyway, it's time for us to close the show now. And again, tell us where to find you and your workshops.
Grief.com, doing 30 cities throughout the U.S., then going to the UK, then Australia. Online classes are at grief.com. And just thank you for, I have to just acknowledge that, you really were my elders in this, not age-wise, but just that you have gone before me and you sit here bringing so much hope to the world.
Oh,
thank you.
And tell us about your book again and where we can get
Finding Meaning,
it.
the 6th stage of grief.
The 6th stage of grief, finding meaning.
That all of us can find meaning and hope.
Yeah, and I know that you're helping so many people find. I think exemplifiers is what we are. We've been through it. We're here. You see us. We're moving. We're walking. We're talking. We have a great life.
And it is important, I think, to hold on to people as a lifeline when you feel like you're drowning and you can't do it. It's like, hold on to people further along in the journey, and that will help you.
I think so. It does. It does help a lot. And we're going to have, as I said, we're going to have Meghan Pulles sing now, and she's going to sing us out of the show, and she's going to sing How. And we want to thank you for watching this show today, because we think it's important to give this voice to grief and recovery. And Heidi and I know David, we all want to say to you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. And we also hope you'll visit us at Open to Hope, because we have, hundreds, thousands of articles, people who are writing. We're an oasis for hope for you. I like to think of us as kind of being an oasis with 1,000 streams.
Oh, I like that.
And
nice.
You can go around and taste different things. If you're somebody who likes video, you can watch video.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who likes to read, you can read articles. There are all sorts of, you can listen to podcasts. There are all sorts of things. And I kind of think if you pick up one thing on this show today, it's enough. When I go to something or watch something, if you pick up one idea.
I agree with you. And for those out there, please get David's book, because he is a phenomenal writer. He has amazing stories, and he will help you find hope again if you don't have it.
Absolutely. So stay open to hope, and God bless.
How can I hold your sadness in moments of great despair? How can I take it away from you and keep you right here? How can I bring in sunshine in the pouring of the rain? How can I give you a new sky and take you out of the pain? Oh, take you out of the pain. Oh, will we ever understand? Will anyone ever explain the hole they leave when it's time for a change? I'm holding the space, holding the space for you, and I'll take your place. your place for you, holding the space. I'll take your place for you, holding the space for you. For you. How can we love